What is going on, y'all? KMBest here. Let's take a look at the best decks to climb in Marvel Snap. We're going to start the tier list off with Scream today, who I think is just a very solid card into a bevy of different mid-range metas. Now, there are a bunch of different Scream decks that you're going to see, but the core is going to remain basically the same. There's just going to be some maneuvering around the edges. Do you want to run a Magneto? Do you want to run a Juggernaut? Do you want to run an Agamotto? All of these things are like particularly viable, but the core here is just that if people are playing things that are not going massively over the top of you, if people are playing a decent amount of Mobius to prevent really degenerate things from happening, if people are playing a decent amount of Shang-Chi, then what this deck can give you is a deck that is not hurt by most of those things. Yes, you are an Iron Patriot deck, but you're not reliant on Iron Patriot in the way that other decks might be. Mobius isn't your favorite thing in the world to see, but you can outscale it and you don't really care. Yes, you are a deck that can, in theory, scale up to 10, especially if you're like actually playing an Agamotto or a Magneto. But other than that, you are mostly, if not entirely, immune to Shang-Chi. And so you have this sort of deck that is just extremely well positioned in a world where mid-range things are what is happening. And a lot of decks right now would meet my general definition of mid-range, which is like about, 9-3 ratio of just like, here are cards that are executing my game plan, and here are cards that for interacting with our opponent. And this deck manages to sort of overlap those pretty well, and that has always sort of been the secret to Scream's success, that it combines interaction and scaling with moving things around with Scream herself. But the deck has really been turbocharged as we have moved back in to an Iron Patriot Sam Wilson meta after the nerfs to Hela, meaning that this is just an excellent deck into other decks that are doing similar stuff, but without the Scream package. The Season Passler is basically the exact same deck as it was last week, and it only really has one real change that people are making, and it's basically you pick 2 of 3 1-drops to run. Those 1-drops, of course, King Atri, Quinjet, and Zabu. You're really just seeing like the difference between running Zabu or Quinjet, honestly. King Atri is kind of a slam dunk inclusion in all of these. What I really enjoy about playing this list is that it is a deck that has so many nebulous question marks in it. The range on what you can do is very, very wide, and so it's very hard to play against this deck if you're not really up to speed on all of the things they can do. There's tricky Bolts of Balthak final turns where they just have 10 energy and you have no idea what's going on. Weird Winds of Watum plays that can win locations in unexpected ways. All sorts of legitimate power thanks to Images of Icon on Galacta and Gwenpool. And I think the most important impact that this deck has on the metagame right now is it's sort of the premier Juggernaut deck. Like, one of the things that you'll probably notice throughout this tier list is there's a lot of decks that are just like a bunch of good cards and a Juggernaut, and then they just sort of figure it out. Like, just Juggernaut, Shang-Chi, Sam Wilson, Iron Patriot, Galacta, Gwenpool, just figure it out. It's going to be fine. Like, you're just going to figure out the rest of the deck from there, do whatever you want with that. And so, to a degree, this is like almost barely an Agamotto deck. Like, there's the Agamotto stuff could arguably be a downside. It gives you so much air in between, like, your incredibly busted actual cards. But this is sort of the premier one in terms of output range, and that makes it very difficult to play against. Whenever I play against discard, I keep feeling like there's nothing I can do to actually win when they draw their good cards. One of the things that this deck does really well is prey on decks that are really only running Shang-Chi as an interactive tool. And that is just like a very powerful thing to do right now. Any deck that can really have that kind of ability where it's just like, the only thing I really need to worry about is Shang-Chi, and if I'm worried about Shang-Chi and I don't get hit by it, I'm going to be fine because I'm just going to outpower them through Juggernauts some of the time even. Like, this is a deck that has early scalers that get down, which makes Juggernaut basically useless because it's not actually preventing the power being added to like your Morbius lane or your Dakin lane or whatever. So right now, this feels like a deck that is super well positioned into sort of the Season Pass plus Juggernaut piles that you see running around. There's just a lot of beef that this thing can bring to bear. There is one notable interaction you're going to have to keep track of, and it is Winds of Watum on your Dakin. A lot of the time, your best lines are like, Dakin Grandmaster with a bullseye. I'm never getting Shang-Chi'd. I have 10 million dudes. If you get your Dakin Winds of Watum, you are in legitimate trouble. There's also some things that happen with this deck where it's just like you just drew the wrong half of the deck. You're not actually doing the things that win you the matchup. You just kind of run into some issues. There are decks that are playing like Gorgon and Sandman and Mobius, and that kind of stuff can really jack up your bullseye scaling plans, which is part of why we have Grandmaster back in the deck, because Dakin at least is a little bit more reliable as a scaler, because you will be able to, even in a world where you get Gorgoned or something like that, still discard them off of a MODOK at the very least. This Surfer list also fits in the category of a bunch of Season Pass cards and a Juggernaut. It's definitely good, and it's really picked up in play rate since my video on it, and in that play rate sample size right now, it has about a 59.9% win rate on Untapped in the top 10%. That is a very good win rate, although win rate numbers on Untapped, I do believe, are a little bit inflated because there is a reporting bias on those who are taking it seriously enough. It is a relevant little piece of data to know. So this is another deck that is doing very similar stuff. Like, it doesn't play out similarly necessarily to an Agamotto deck, but what you will notice is that a lot of your wins end up looking kind of the same. You have your Sam Wilson, you have your Iron Patriot, you have your Galacta, and then you just sort of figure out what the other points in your deck come from, and then you play a Juggernaut, and then you win a game. And so, like, this is a deck that doesn't necessarily have the exact same profile as an Agamotto deck, but it looks similar in function and it feels similar to play against some of the time. And so what this means is that this is a deck that I group more with the Agamotto decks than as a Surfer deck mentally in my head, where it's just like Season Passes and Juggernaut, that's what's really going on. When you're playing against this, the one thing that will pay off for you is knowing that they don't have a Shang-Chi, which opens up a variety of different ways that you can approach these matchups. Another deck that really picked up in play rate after we covered it on the channel, this is a very, very strong, legitimate deck that I think is one of the best options for anyone who doesn't want to think too hard. This is a very easy deck to play, and I think that that is something that a lot of tier lists genuinely underrate. It's not like the win rate is anything to scoff at either. The stats on Untapped are very good. I believe it's about 57 and about 1,000 game sample size over the last 7 days in top 10%. There is something to be said for that. In my own personal experience, this has just felt like a really strong deck that at the very highest level, I think people are going to be able to understand how to beat a little bit more, but you're probably not watching this if you're at that level, and I think a lot of the time, you're going to benefit if you are a weaker player. Let's say you're climbing up to infinite right now, from just playing something that is actually easy. I think actually that should be one of your number one priorities, is making sure that you are playing a deck that you think you can play to its full capacity. And that is often going to be less than you think. And so this is a deck that I think is very, very high on my recommendations, in part because of ease, but in part because of power. Mobius is an excellent card right now, and I think one thing that you'll notice when you play this deck is how little you have to worry about Iron Patriots once you have this out there, and there are so many Iron Patriots in the game. You have Gorgon, who's great versus Thanos, great versus various versions of decks that are creating cards. You just have a bunch of stuff that is good. You have a bunch of ways to win lanes on the back end with your Doctor Doom, with things that move, and so you just get a lot of games where you have like an advantage that is very hard to overcome for your opponent, because like maybe they just can't get power into a lane, there's like a kiln or something, or maybe it's not kiln. Yeah, no, it's a kiln. That's the one that ends on 4. I get it confused with Clintar all the time because they're spelled the exact same. And actually, I'm pretty sure way back in the day, they switched the names of them, but what do I know? Anyway, locations like that, Sanctum Sanctorum, huge benefit to you, and there's more of those than you think, and they're genuinely snap conditions a lot of the time. Stop me if you've heard this before, but we're going to talk about a deck that uses Juggernaut in combination with a bunch of Season Pass cards that are very, very good in order to achieve lane wins. Now, I know that's a novel concept, and I don't think you've ever heard of it before. That's what this deck is really trying to accomplish here. Again, it's like theoretically a different archetype. Oh, we're Sera. We're doing something totally different. Except the thing is, you're not. You're doing exactly the same thing as an Agamotto deck is. You're just doing it slightly differently in terms of execution. You are playing points, you are playing Shang-Chi, you are playing Galacta, you are playing Juggernaut, you are playing Sam Wilson, you are playing Iron Patriot. Like, it's the same thing. And so it gets a little bit tough because, like, yes, that's only like 6 or 7 of the cards. There is like a meaningful difference here. They're not Agamotto-ings, but like, zooming out, this definitely falls into the same camp of just we're playing season passes and Juggernaut. And I think that that is sort of the thing I want you to take away from this is not just like, wow, there's a lot of that, but also like, hey, if I want to beat these decks, being a deck that beats Juggernaut is a great thing to be. That's actually one of the major advantages of the Sandman deck. It's just a deck that beats the hell out of Juggernaut. And so many decks are so reliant on that card. And being able to turn a thing that they think is going to win them cubes into a thing that loses cubes is the most valuable thing in the world. Winning games on turn 6, counterplaying your opponent's turn 6 is the best thing you can do. And so this is what I'm really trying to use to drive home the point that, like, if you want to beat this stuff, start with beating Juggernaut. I got this Thanos list from Pluto. I didn't know I did at the time, but he appears to be a majority of the sample size on Untapped. And so this is a list that I'm putting on here in order to draw contrast with a different list. And that is, of course, the Firehair Thanos list. I think actual Thanos has some real potential. The reason I think actual Thanos has some real potential is look at all the good cards that we can play in actual Thanos. Look at how good these cards are just on a card for card basis. Look at how awesome they are at just doing things like being played on turn 2 and not being conditional on everything else you have. This is a legitimate actual deck that I genuinely believe is way, way better than the Firehair stuff, like this. I don't know a better way to say it. This deck is bad. You should not play this deck if you want a deck to carry you. I think that there is a difference between a deck being bad and a deck not being able to carry you, right? Like, that's a real thing, right? But this is both of those things. By choosing to play this deck, you are opting into more losing matchups than you are winning matchups. When you watch a video like this, the thing you should want to come away with is a deck that has an inherently positive matchup against the field. You want to be playing something that when you start an average game, you're at 53% and your opponent is at 47% just because you're playing a better deck. That is my goal, to provide you with those things. This is the opposite of that. It's not good. It does some very cool things. I am actually serious when I say, like, this is a very hard deck to play against a lot of the time because, like, doing things like eating your Shang-Chi so Firehair fires it off again, eating a Reality Stone so Firehair transforms the Nexus. There's really cool stuff in here. The thing is, it's not being balanced out by enough power. There's definitely some strength here, but you are still fundamentally a deck that is playing Angel, a deck that is playing Makari. And instead of playing things like Iron Patriot and Sam Wilson, you're playing these synergistic cards and devoting a lot of synergy to a game plan that basically folds if your opponent plays a Gorgon or a Mobius. It's a little bit awkward. This is Denish Hela. It remains unchanged, and I actually got off my Hela-hating ass and played this myself. And it was shockingly successful. I went like 14-6. It was dope as hell. This is like a pretty good deck. It's also, I think, kind of very difficult to play, and it requires a lot of sort of intricate interaction knowledge to be willing to play it, in my opinion. And so, like, I think if you wanted to play this optimally, and I certainly wasn't, it requires a lot of, like, pressure snaps and things like that, because one thing that I will say I have noticed is that people don't know what this deck is and what it does. They're used to playing against every other Hela deck, where, like, if you discard your Hela, oh, I can snap that. This deck can bring Hela back off of a Ghost Rider and then, like, Odin the Ghost Rider if they missed it. The other thing people are used to is Hela herself being an overpowering amount of points, and that's the other mistake people will make when playing against this, because honestly, a lot of the time, you're bringing back, like, 1/6-drop and, like, a 4 or something like that is not always all that good. So the way I want you to think about this deck is it's a little bit more like a curve out deck, and the most important card in the deck is Corvus Glaive by a pretty massive margin. You are a combination Hela deck and just like a ramp deck, right? Like there are games where you just play like Iron Patriot, Corvus Glaive, 5-drop, 6-drop, 6-drop. That's just good enough a lot of the time. Like you can just play those games and it's just like, that's sick as hell. You get to blink into big 6s a lot of the time. You get to Jubilee into big stuff a lot of the time. You get to Gambit and Odin the Gambit, things like that, where it's just like, there's just a lot of non-Hela game plan in here that I think mostly goes unnoticed. This deck is kind of a pet deck of mine. I straight up love playing it. It's just an absolute blast every time. It has a really notable Mobius problem. Like, not only are you an anti-Venom deck, you are a deck that is relying on Ravonna Renslayer to make your strongest plays a lot of the time. You can play against Mobius decks, but like a solid third of your deck is just way worse when you're not doing it. And so if you're playing against a Mobius deck, like you kind of need to be like a curve out Spectrum deck. It's not great, and there's kind of a lot of Mobius. Another thing is that the Sandman deck is just good against you kind of no matter what, because if they don't have Mobius, they do have Sandman, and God forbid they have both, because you're just not outputting enough points to deal with them in that case. This deck is a deck that works on pretty fine energy margins, and having them messed up is legitimately extremely damaging to your game plan. I love playing this deck. I don't necessarily think it's a good choice as long as a significant portion of the metagame is playing this Sandman Mobius stuff, or even just playing Mobius at all. The same thing sort of applies here, where we're vulnerable to basically every tech card in the Sandman deck. We are vulnerable to Sandman, we are vulnerable to Mobius, we are vulnerable to Gorgon. And it's just like, as much as I do believe that this is probably still the best build for Victoria Hand, there has been plenty of experimenting with the Firehair version of this. I'm not convinced it's actually better than just playing this. Like, I feel like, in as much as I've played plenty of the Firehair versions, I don't necessarily feel convinced that they are dramatically, or even a little bit, better than just playing, like, the old versions of V-Hand like this. I do think that, like, maybe we want to start looking a different direction from the Moonstone stuff and go back to the really old versions of V-Hand, but the problem is, the really old versions of V-Hand were anti-Venom decks, and so we're just as weak to Mobius as we would be otherwise. This is a deck that I really, again, it's another deck where it's like, I like this, I enjoy playing it. There's just a little bit too much of the things that are good against it in the metagame right now. Next, let's take a look at an old standby. Wiccan is a deck. One of the things about this metagame is that there is a lot of utility for Shang-Chi, but you kind of have to be moving in a certain way to make it happen. I think one of the things that really defines this metagame is sort of the interplay between Shang-Chi and Juggernaut, and the way in which priority has to be managed by both players in order to accommodate for those cards. And I think that that is actually fairly similar to how we used to have like an interplay between Shang-Chi and Alioth, and like that's one of those things. If you really want to be on the Shang-Chi side of that divide, I think a Wiccan deck is a good spot to be in. You get to be able to be a Fenris Shang-Chi deck, which is effectively like having two Shang-Chis. So if you get that target, it's a very good spot for you. But there are like some genuinely complex things here. Wiccan decks generally, and I've tried a bunch of different ones, like you can just get rid of all of this stuff and like cut Fenris for Sam Wilson, and then it's just like, what is the point of doing this instead of playing any of the other things that are doing this, except they don't have to play Wiccan. They just get to play Galacta instead, and they get to play Agamotto, and they get to like it just doesn't make a ton of sense to be playing a Wiccan deck without like some actual hook towards being a Wiccan deck, right? And so that's sort of where I'm at when it comes to this build. A lot of other Wiccan decks, maybe they exist, but they look a lot more like worse versions of decks we've already talked about. Whereas at least this one, it's like, all right, here is an ethos. Here is a thing that I am trying to do that I hopefully will be able to do to catch my opponent off guard, rather than just playing the same season pass pile, but like worse because I'm a Quicksilver deck. I think Diamondback has become one of the more underrated cards in Marvel Snap right now. Every time I play against her, she feels like an absolute monster. Honestly, like that is a very strong card for a very small cost. I do think that one of the other things, like you'll notice we talked about how much I love playing the version of the ongoing deck that has like the anti-venom loot cage in it. One of the big reasons that I used to love it is that it just sort of free rolls this matchup. I think that this is still a very plausible deck. Even just the base version of the Ajax list is probably totally fine. But what we're seeing in this metagame where like we don't get to run many of the same super busted cards is that this list is sort of adapting by going a little bit further towards big boom final turns. And that is what seems to be needed to compete with the way season pass decks seem to be shaping up, right? Like that is the kind of thing where it's like, all right, we are recognizing that if we try to mid-range for mid-range on these guys, they're probably going to be able to go over the top of us. They have better tools to do that. So what we're going to do is try to big brother them with giant Ajaxes and free abominations and just generally go nuts. I straight up have no idea what Arishem's good matchups even are. Like, I would be hard pressed to figure out what Arishem's matchups even are, because it's just such a fundamentally clown showish deck where like just having a Galacta on 3 could be all the difference between a good matchup and a bad matchup, and that'll just happen some of the time, and then the rest of the time it won't happen. And just like the deck is as many cards as possible where you want to, like, the fundamental ethos, I think, is you have as many cards as possible where playing them early is unfair enough to win you a game. That's kind of it, right? Like, that's what this deck is. Like, you are trying to do as many things that are powerful as early as you can, and running tech in here, it feels almost like a fool's errand. Like, oh, I'm playing Mobius. Like, yeah, okay, you're definitely going to draw that. Like, all right, sure, dude. And so, like, you just have this deck where it's just like, I don't know what the good matchups are. Your entire game plan against every deck is just like, do something stupid, hopefully by turn 3, several question marks, play Eliath. And then that's just like, that's it. That's the deck. That's like kind of what it is. You're not really doing things that aren't that. Like, it's just kind of what Arishem is about right now. I guess you can try to play Mr. Negative. I feel like Mr. Negative is in a very bad meta, where Mr. Negative typically shines when we are in combo heavy metagames that do not make people play Mobius, which is to say when Hela is elite, Mr. Negative is a great counter for that because everyone is trying to deal with Hela and nobody is playing Mobius, because playing a Mobius against a Hela deck is the most embarrassing thing in the world. Basically every other metagame, you are not in a good spot. And Mr. Negative, again, like, it's a deck. It exists. You can do it. I don't think the math adds up on it. This is a deck that really wants you to like snap early and aggressively, and having that be able to, I don't know what Mobius's play rate is right now, but basically any number above like 2% is probably really bad for you, and I'd ballpark him around about 10. And that is just not good, because you're already a deck that razor thin margins, right? Like, you need to win big in the games you win because you're retreating for one so often when you don't do anything. And that means that you're priced into snapping, and any amount of those snaps being flipped on you with a Mobius is just game losing. It's really bad. I wasn't sure whether to put move or move bounce on here. I opted for move, because when I went to look at the numbers for move bounce, there were 2 decks with more than 100 games played in Top Infinite. One of them had about a 60% win rate. The other one was at 45. The only difference between them was a 2-drop. And I think that that sort of demonstrates the gap between the very best players in the world playing Move Bounce and literally everybody else. And I think that it is very hard for me to recommend a deck that I think realistically, if you watching this pick it up, are going to have much closer results to that 45% win rate than you will to that 60%. I find it a lot harder to recommend. And so for that reason, the move deck we're talking about is the classic one with Cosmo and Alioth, which I think is a reasonably positioned and powerful deck to try right now that is a legitimate threat to deal with things that, or to bring back a style of play that I think has been a little bit, neglected. This deck has really powerful draws. It has the ability to juke people. It's got a lot of strong stuff. It is very good into Juggernaut. And so there's a lot of upside towards reinvestigating this style of move. Couple honorable mentions. This is a Husky Elsa deck. I'm not going to sit here and act like this is anything other than a Season Pass plus Juggernaut deck. I actually did very well with this. I was kind of surprised, but again, it's a Season Pass plus Juggernaut deck that includes ways to beat opposing Juggernaut decks, right? Like we have this stuff that moves around. We have the ability to beat out a Juggernaut in terms of points, and having that is just a very valuable thing. This is like the proof of concept that we're talking about here. We have multiple things that play through Juggernaut. We have a lot of seriously strong power buffing things, and that is just good enough to be an actual deck right now. This one's a me thing where I actually did a video on this deck, and I will say, I learned an important lesson in that video, which is if you're trying to get people to click, don't say that a deck is playable, because nobody watched that video. So for those of you that didn't watch that video, this deck is playable. I'm not putting it on here to say that it's one of the best decks in the game. I'm putting it on here to say Bruce Banner's in a playable deck, and that matters, goddammit. This guy has been so bad for so long. Unfortunately, this deck runs into two really big issues with the Season Pass Juggernaut decks. One, it's bad into Juggernaut. Two, it's bad into Iron Patriot. And that sort of relegates it to like tier 2.5 at best. I know you know what time it is. It's time to talk about the end of the tier list, baby. You know it's Destroy's spot. This is the honorable space for Destroy where it exists. It's not very good, but you can still win with it. I lost 4 cubes to a Destroy gamer earlier today. It can absolutely happen. It happened to me, so it can happen to you. It's a real thing. They still exist out there. People are playing this deck. I don't really know why, but they are. It loses to every tech card that has ever been made. Anything you could even reasonably describe as a tech card, with the exception of like Gorgon. But everything's going to find a place of usefulness here. You have Mobius against the Death. You have Shang-Chi against big stuff. You have Killmonger, if you can throw priority and blow up their big Deadpool on the final turn of the game. You have Enchantress on their Null. There's just so many ways to make your cards matter against this deck that it's just very difficult for me to believe in it as a real threat. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for making it through that video. As always, I have been KMBest. You have been phenomenal. Remember to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.